What if we could turn this desert into a forest, all without planting a single tree? Beneath this seemingly barren landscape, there's a huge underground forest that is ready and waiting to burst out.
For decades, millions of tons of wool were dumped and forgotten while the soil beneath our feet quietly failed. Some believed the waste held an answer.
They are magic. You take it and you shred it and compress it into tiny little pellets about the size of cat kibble, so it's an organic fertilizer.
Most thought it was nonsense. When scientists buried wool into ruined land, there were no guarantees, only risk.
Digging a grave, not for livestock, not for waste. For wool, freshly shorn premium-grade merino fleece.
Then the soil changed. Water stayed. Crops returned. Yield surged.
We get an energy that didn't exist before, just from living organisms.
What was thrown away began reversing collapse.
The sheep's wool contains around 10% nitrogen. It releases nitrogen and lots of other nutrients for the plants.
And it's forcing agriculture to confront a mistake it never knew it made. The scale of the problem. Across large parts of Australia, the ground itself has been quietly giving up. Not overnight, not in one dramatic collapse, but year after year. Soil that once held crops, water, and nutrients has been thinning out. Government modeling later confirmed what farmers were already seeing. Between the years 2006 and 2020, much of New South Wales lost at least 2.7 tons per hectare of topsoil organic carbon. That number matters because organic carbon is what gives soil its strength, its structure, and its ability to recover. On a 500-hectare farm, that loss equals 1,350 tons of organic carbon over 14 years. The foundation of productive soil, disappearing season after season. As that carbon disappears, the land changes fast. Rain no longer sinks in the way it used to. Water runs off instead of soaking down to the roots. Dry periods hit harder and last longer. Wind picks up loose particles and carries them away. Farmers respond the only way they can, by adding more fertilizer, irrigating more often, and spending more just to hold yield steady. Each season becomes more expensive, more fragile, and harder to predict. Drive through affected regions and the signs are hard to miss. Dust hangs in the air after light winds. Paddocks show bare patches where crops struggle to establish. Soil cracks form earlier in the season and stay longer. This is not just about poor harvests. It is about land losing its ability to support farming at all. For years, solutions focused on chemistry, better fertilizers, smarter inputs, precision applications. Those tools helped in the short term, but they did little to rebuild the soil itself. The deeper issue remained. Without organic matter, the ground cannot store water, support microbes, or protect crops when conditions turn harsh. That is where an unlikely idea enters the story. While soils were declining, another problem was piling up elsewhere. Australia produces vast amounts of sheep's wool every year, and not all of it is used in clothing or textiles. Large volumes of low-grade wool and processing waste had limited value and few clear uses. It was treated as excess, sometimes stored, sometimes discarded. At some point, researchers and farmers started asking a simple question. What if this wasted material could return something valuable to the land? Not as a product of fashion, but as a tool for rebuilding soil. That question would lead to trials, data, and results that few expected, and it would change how some farmers began to think about both waste and recovery. Where the wool comes from, scale and waste potential. Each year, millions of sheep are shorn across Australia, producing wool at a scale few industries can match. For the 2024 to 2025 season, forecasts placed Australia's shorn wool production at roughly 279 million kilograms of greasy wool. Before any washing, processing, or export, that is close to 280,000 tons moving through the system in a single year. It is an enormous stream of material, steady, predictable, and deeply tied to rural life. Most of that wool follows a familiar path. It is classified, baled, sold, and shipped overseas for textiles. Fine wool finds high-value markets. Medium grades feed carpets and furnishings. But not all wool fits neatly into that pipeline. Coarse fibers, contaminated fleeces, offcuts from processing, and short fibers trimmed away during manufacturing often fall to the bottom of the value ladder. These materials are harder to sell, expensive to transport, and rarely worth refining into fabric. As a result, large volumes of wool never make it into finished products. Some end up stockpiled near shearing sheds or processing facilities. Some are buried or sent to a landfill. Others sit unused simply because there is no clear economic reason to move them. Industry reviews and academic assessments have pointed out that once textile losses and low-grade streams are counted, hundreds of thousands of tons of wool and wool byproducts are available worldwide each year with no high-value destination. For years, this was treated as a side issue. Wool was seen through a single lens, either valuable fiber or an unwanted excess. The idea that it could play a role outside textiles barely entered the conversation. Yet the scale of the material kept forcing the question back onto the table. When you produce something in such volume, even a small, unused fraction becomes a serious waste challenge. This is where perspectives began to change. Researchers started looking beyond fashion and furnishings and toward biology and soil science. Wool, after all, is organic. It grows every year. It carries nutrients. It breaks down over time. Those traits mattered once people stopped asking how to sell wool and started asking what else it could do. The numbers forced a question. If even 5% of low-grade wool returned to farmland, that would be nearly 14 million kilograms of nitrogen-rich organic material entering Australian soil each year. Why wool? Once wool was taken out of the fashion conversation, a different set of questions took over. What is this material actually made of? And how does it behave once it leaves the sheep? The answers turned out to be surprisingly useful for soil. Wool is a natural protein fiber. At its core is keratin, a compound rich in nitrogen and sulfur, two nutrients plants rely on to grow. Studies measuring wool composition consistently show nitrogen levels high enough to matter in agricultural terms. The difference is how that nitrogen behaves. Unlike synthetic fertilizers that dissolve quickly and wash away with rain, wool breaks down slowly. Microbes have to work at it. That gradual breakdown means nutrients are released over time, not all at once. In soil science, that matters because it reduces losses and feeds plants steadily instead of flooding the system. This slow mineralization also helps explain why wool does not act like a chemical input. There is no sudden spike, no sharp drop. The soil absorbs what it can as microbes convert the fibers into usable forms. For farmers dealing with sandy or degraded soils, this kind of release is valuable. It supports crops without pushing nutrients beyond the root zone where they are lost. Then there is the physical side, which is where wool starts to stand out. Under a microscope, wool fibers look nothing like smooth threads. They are crimped, textured, and full of tiny air spaces. Those structures allow wool to absorb and hold large amounts of water relative to its weight. The crimped structure means wool fibers can trap air and moisture simultaneously, creating numerous small water reserves throughout the soil profile. When mixed into soil or laid on the surface, the fibers act like miniature reservoirs. They take in moisture during rain or irrigation and release it slowly as the surrounding soil dries. Field and plot trials have shown what this looks like in practice. Treated soils stay moist longer between watering cycles. Roots encounter fewer dry gaps. Plants experience less stress during hot periods, especially in lighter soils that usually drain too fast. The effect is not dramatic in a single day, but over a season, it changes how crops cope with dry spells. What makes this combination powerful is how the chemistry and physics work together. Wool feeds the soil while also improving how that soil handles water. It supports microbes, stabilizes moisture, and reduces the sharp swings that damage crops during drought. Nothing about it is artificial or fast-acting, and that is exactly the point. By the time researchers finished testing these properties, wool no longer looked like an odd choice. How wasted wool is processed into a farm input. Turning discarded wool into something farmers can actually use did not happen in one leap. At the most basic level, farmers began laying raw wool directly onto the soil as mulch. No heavy processing, no complex machinery. Wool was spread around crops or across bare ground, forming a loose cover. The results were immediate enough to notice. The wool reduced surface evaporation, slowed water loss, and blocked sunlight from reaching weed seeds. In dry conditions, soil stayed workable longer. In windy areas, the surface held together instead of drifting away. This approach was cheap, accessible, and easy to test on small plots, which made it attractive to farmers willing to experiment without major risk. Still, raw wool had limits. It was bulky, uneven, and not always easy to apply at scale. That pushed researchers and producers toward a more refined option. Wool pellets became the next step. By compressing wool into dense, uniform pellets, handling became easier and application rates could be controlled. Some pellet formulations blended wool with sawdust or compost to balance breakdown speed and soil interaction. Once in the ground, the pellets behaved much like organic fertilizers. They swelled as they absorbed moisture, held it near roots, and released nutrients gradually as microbes went to work. Field trials gave this method credibility. Studies such as those led by Thomas Bradshaw showed that wool pellets supported plant growth and nutrient uptake in ways comparable to commercial organic inputs. The difference was the source. This was not mined or manufactured fertilizer. It was waste wool given a second purpose. The processing costs varied by method, but the key advantage remained consistent across all forms. Wool delivered both nutrient release and moisture retention from a single input, where farmers previously needed separate products for each function. In Australia, companies like Aussie Wool Pellets stepped in to move the idea out of research plots and into farm supply chains. Their products offered consistency, packaging, and guidance, which made adoption easier for growers who wanted results without guesswork. As interest grew, more technical approaches followed. Wool hydrolysates and enzyme-treated wool entered the picture for specialized uses. By breaking wool down further, nutrients became available more quickly, making these products suitable for situations where faster uptake mattered. These methods required more processing and higher costs, so they remained targeted rather than widespread. Even so, they proved that wool's potential extended beyond slow inputs and could be adapted for different farming needs. What tied all these methods together was flexibility. Wool did not demand one solution. It offered options that ranged from spreading raw fleece on a paddock to applying measured pellets through standard equipment. Farmers could choose what fit their scale, budget, and soil conditions. By this stage, wool was no longer just a material looking for a use. It had become a toolkit. How researchers and farmers ran trials. Researchers and farmers needed to see what actually happened when wool met soil under real conditions, not just in controlled labs. That meant structured trials, careful measurement, and patience. Most pilot projects followed a similar blueprint. Fields were divided into randomized plots, so no area had an advantage. One plot received no wool at all and served as the control. Others received increasing amounts, usually classified as low, medium, and high treatments. Replication mattered. Each treatment appeared multiple times across the field to rule out luck or uneven ground. This setup allowed clear comparisons over time. Application rates were deliberately conservative at first. Published trials tested wool mulch or pellet equivalents ranging from about 0.5 ton to 5 tons per hectare, adjusted for soil type and crop. Starting small was intentional. Farmers needed to know whether modest inputs could make a difference before committing larger volumes. Once the wool was applied, the weighting began. Measurements followed a fixed schedule. At the start, baseline data was collected so changes could be tracked accurately. Then samples were taken again at 3 months, 6 months, and 12 months. Soil moisture was one of the first indicators researchers watched. It showed how long water stayed available between rainfall or irrigation. Nitrogen forms were tracked closely, including nitrate and ammonium, along with total organic nitrogen. These numbers revealed whether nutrients were being released gradually or lost too quickly. Physical soil traits were monitored alongside chemistry. Bulk density measurements showed whether soil structure was improving or compacting. Root mass offered clues about how plants responded below the surface, not just above it. Yield data came last, but it carried weight. Farmers care about soil health, but harvest still pays the bills. What made these trials valuable was their simplicity. Nothing exotic, no custom machinery. The goal was to test wool in conditions farmers actually face: drought years, variable rainfall, different crops. Some trials ran on vegetables, others on orchards or pasture. Each added a piece to the picture. The data revealed something practical. Higher application rates did not always produce better results. Moderate inputs, typically 2 to 3 tons per hectare, often matched the performance of 5-ton applications, reducing costs while delivering similar benefits. It also reinforced the idea that wool worked best as part of a system, not a single fix. These pilots did something else just as important. They built confidence. Farmers could see the numbers, walk the plots, and dig into the soil themselves. Researchers could point to data collected over a full year, not just a promising few weeks. By the end of the first cycle, the question had changed. It was no longer whether wool could influence soil. It was how to fine-tune rates, timing, and application methods for different landscapes, measured winds. One of the first results researchers focused on was water. Across multiple trials, soils treated with wool consistently held more moisture than untreated plots. Depending on soil type and application rate, moisture levels increased by roughly 3% at the low end and climbed as high as 25% in lighter sandy soils. On screen, the difference was easy to see. Bar charts tracked month-by-month readings showing treated plots drying out more slowly after rain or irrigation. For farmers used to watching water disappear within days, that extra buffer mattered. The nutrient data followed a similar pattern. Wool pellet treatments led to noticeable increases in available nitrogen, particularly nitrate levels. Some studies recorded nitrate rises between 41 and 54% compared to control plots. That increase did not arrive all at once. It built gradually over time, matching the slow breakdown of the wool fibers. Plant tissue samples backed this up. Crops grown in treated soil showed higher nutrient uptake, confirming that the nitrogen was not just present in the soil but actually reaching the plants. What made these findings practical was their consistency. Results showed up across different crops and conditions, not just in one isolated trial. Researchers could point to repeated measurements taken over months rather than one strong reading that faded quickly. For growers, that reliability mattered as much as the percentage gains themselves. Yield data brought the story home. In a plum orchard trial, trees treated with wool mulch produced yields around 27% higher than untreated trees. When wool was combined with a soil conditioner, yields increased by about 37%. Even more striking was fruit quality. Average fruit weight rose by as much as 49% in the best-performing treatment. Side-by-side visuals made the difference obvious. Larger fruit, more uniform size, fewer signs of stress. These gains were not achieved through heavier fertilizer use or increased irrigation. They came from changing how the soil functioned. Better moisture retention reduced stress during dry periods. Gradual nutrient release supported steady growth instead of short bursts followed by decline. Roots developed more evenly, which helped plants cope when conditions turned difficult. Another important takeaway was efficiency. Higher application rates did not always produce proportionally better results. In several cases, moderate wool inputs delivered most of the benefit. That finding helped keep costs manageable and reinforced the idea that wool worked best as a part of a balanced approach, not an overload. What actually happens underground? Once wool enters the soil, the real story begins quietly and quickly.
The point of amending the soil with compost is to improve the soil structure.
In the first few weeks, the effect is mostly physical. The fibers trap moisture right where roots need it, reducing how fast the soil dries after heat or wind. Temperature swings soften too. That steadier environment creates a safer starting point for seeds and young roots. Below the surface, microbes begin moving in. They treat the wool as a new food source, and during this early phase, some nitrogen can be temporarily tied up as microbes get to work. It looks like a slowdown, but it is actually the system gearing up. As weeks turn into months, the chemistry starts to matter more than the texture. Microbial activity breaks down the wool's keratin structure, releasing nitrogen and sulfur at a measured pace. This is not a spike. It is a steady feed. Roots respond by growing deeper and branching more evenly through the soil profile. Nutrients become available when plants are actively growing, not washed away after the first rainfall. Farmers often notice crops holding their color longer through dry spells and maintaining growth when untreated plots begin to fade. This middle phase is where consistency shows its value. Wool does not rush. It keeps releasing nutrients as microbes continue their work. That ongoing process supports healthier root zones and improves how plants explore the soil. Instead of shallow, stressed roots chasing surface moisture, plants gain access to deeper reserves. This sets up stronger performance later in the season, especially when rainfall becomes unpredictable. Over the long term, repeated wool applications begin to reshape the soil itself. Organic matter increases year after year. Soil particles bind into more stable aggregates, which improves structure and airflow. Bulk density drops, making it easier for roots to penetrate and for water to move where it is needed instead of pooling or running off. These changes are not cosmetic. Multi-season studies show that soils treated this way behave differently under stress, staying productive when untreated soils struggle. What makes this process compelling is its patience. Wool works on a timeline that matches natural systems. Each application adds another layer of improvement without overwhelming the soil. Over time, the ground becomes more forgiving, more productive, and more predictable to manage. Risks, limitations, and how researchers mitigate them. Even as wool began delivering results, researchers understood it came with real challenges. The first issue was what raw wool carries with it. Unprocessed fleece is not only fiber. It can contain lanolin residues, traces of processing chemicals, and harmful organisms. Applied straight to soil without preparation, these elements could disrupt plant growth or soil life. That is why specialists stress basic safeguards. Composting wool before use allows microbes to stabilize residues. Batch testing confirms consistency, while industrial pelleting adds further control by reducing contamination risk and standardizing application. Research and regulatory guidance from Australian Wool Innovation, the sector's leading research body, back these steps, showing that prepared wool breaks down in a controlled and predictable way. The second challenge is inconsistency. Wool varies widely. Fiber length, thickness, and density change by breed, flock, and season. These differences affect how quickly nutrients such as nitrogen and sulfur become available. Conditions in the field add another layer. Soil moisture, temperature, and microbial activity all influence breakdown rates. Fine merino wool in warm, damp soil may release nutrients rapidly, while coarser fibers in dry ground respond far more slowly. Without planning, outcomes can vary. To reduce uncertainty, researchers focus on phased applications and blending strategies. Applying wool in stages and mixing it with other organic materials like compost or sawdust helps regulate nutrient release. This method gives farmers control, ensuring crops receive steady support without excess or shortage. Ongoing soil testing tracks changes through the season and allows adjustments, turning observation into informed decision-making. Preparation and monitoring make the difference. Wool performs best when treated as a measured input, not an unknown variable. Consistent batches, awareness of local conditions, and staged application all improve reliability. By managing both contamination and variability, researchers have transformed wool from a risk into a dependable soil amendment. These safeguards reveal a larger point. The challenges do not undermine wool's value. They invite smarter systems. With careful handling and informed management, farmers can unlock wool's benefits while limiting drawbacks. Over time, this approach reshapes a discarded material into a practical tool that rebuilds soil, supports crops, and fits within modern farming systems. Evidence over guesswork. By the time wool trials left controlled research plots and entered working farms, the idea began proving itself in the real world. A key force behind this shift has been Australian wool innovation, known as AWI. Through funding and coordination, they support on-farm trials, publish clear guidance on safe wool use, and monitor how wool breaks down across different soil types. Their work replaces guesswork with evidence, showing farmers how wool performs under everyday conditions. AWI-backed trials span diverse regions from sandy paddocks in New South Wales to mixed soils across Victoria. These sites reveal not only where wool works best, but also how to apply it effectively over time. Farmers receive practical direction on application rates, timing, and how wool can complement other organic inputs. The findings close the gap between experimentation and daily farm operations, proving wool is not a curiosity but a workable soil input. At the same time, smaller commercial players are helping turn research into action. Businesses such as Aussie Wool Pellets compress low-value wool into uniform pellets that are easy to store, transport, and spread. In the soil, these pellets behave like slow-release inputs.
That will be used by gardeners to improve their soil and help their plants grow,
delivering nutrients gradually while holding moisture where crops need it. Many growers report healthier soils paired with simpler application compared to loose wool. Other innovators, including Fleece Grow, are pushing further by blending wool with compost and other organic materials. Their approach focuses on fine-tuning nutrient availability while improving soil structure. These regenerative farms are moving beyond trials, testing combinations that can be scaled and repeated by others without adding complexity. Together, AWI and its industry partners reveal how far wool can go once it leaves the shearing shed. From coordinated research to ready-to-use products, a clear pathway has formed for turning surplus wool into practical value. Farmers now have data, tools, and guidance that reduce risk and encourage adoption. What began as an idea has evolved into a working system, showing how research, industry, and innovation can transform a discarded material into a foundation for stronger, more productive farms. Scale, economics, policy, and the big finish. Australia produces wool on a scale few nations can rival. Even after premium fibers are shipped abroad and top-grade fleece reaches global buyers, the country is still left with hundreds of millions of kilograms of greasy wool each year. Much of it never becomes fabric. That surplus, once dismissed as useless, is now revealing its potential. Redirecting even a small share into soil applications means vast amounts of organic material returning to farmland annually. Seen this way, wool shifts roles, turning waste into nourishment, strengthening soils, sustaining crops, and easing reliance on synthetic inputs. The financial logic is just as striking. For years, low-value wool and processing scraps sat idle or were dumped in landfills, draining money and wasting opportunity. Using wool as a soil amendment changes that equation. Field trials and farmer experiences point to improved moisture retention, better nutrient holding, and stronger yields. The benefits are practical and immediate. Fertilizer costs drop, irrigation demands fall, and crops hold up better during dry periods. Beyond the farm gate, the gains multiply. Soil organic matter increases, carbon is locked away, and water moves more efficiently through the ground. Budget trials add clarity. A ton of wool pellets may cost several $100s to produce and deliver, yet the yield increases and soil improvements often outweigh that expense, positioning wool as both an environmental and economic asset. Policy will decide how far this can go. AWI and industry partners are pushing for demonstration farms to prove results at scale, alongside clear standards that ensure wool soil products are safe and consistent. Supportive incentives and targeted subsidies could expand pellet processing capacity, opening the door for wider adoption. These steps do more than encourage uptake. They send a message that wool-to-soil systems are proven pathways, not fringe trials. The principle extends beyond wool. When organic waste streams are redirected into agricultural systems, both disposal problems and soil degradation can be addressed simultaneously. Australia's wool-to-soil approach demonstrates this at scale, showing how materials once considered worthless can rebuild the foundation of productive farming. Thanks for watching. See you on the next one.